Welcome to episode 58 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn. Today, I'm speaking with Morley Robbins for the 5th time. So the episode that I most recommend to people of Mitolife Radio is my first interview with Morley Robbins. It's called How Minerals Run the Show. And I get so many messages from people about anemia, which is a fake condition. Anemia does not exist on planet Earth. And there's no way that I could possibly give you a soundbite in even 5 or 10 minutes. You have to listen to that episode to understand why that's a reality. So Morley Robbins has been a mentor of mine, a huge influence, and obviously we're not going to all agree 100% on everything. And so I've received a lot of messages about his protocol, and specifically the cod liver oil. And you guys know, if you've listened to my work, that I'm not a fan of omega-3s. In fact, I am anti-omega-3s and anti-PUFAs. And that's a lot of my education with Mitolife. My brand and just my entire health message is anti-polyunsaturated fat, anti-DHA. And so what is cod liver oil? But it's a huge source of DHA and EPA, as well as A and D, and you have some fat-soluble vitamins in there. But to me, the detriment of that supplement outweighs the benefit. So I do not ever recommend cod liver oil. I think there are safer sources of A and D, and I don't believe that there is such a thing as essential fatty acid. That's a myth, just like iron anemia. It's physiologically impossible to be anemic on planet Earth. And so if you haven't listened to the first talk with Morley, definitely go back, listen to all of them, the past 4, because they're all amazing. The first one is the mind blower that'll get you out of the matrix, hopefully. And maybe you'll need some shilajit and some magnesium to get fully out of the matrix, but that'll at least hopefully get some wheels turning in your brain to say, oh, okay, maybe I'm not iron deficient, maybe I'm iron toxic. And you kind of need to understand some basics of human physiology to really get that. So in this show, it's not a debate, it's a friendly discussion among colleagues about carbohydrate and sugar, which he's also not a fan of, and PUFA, which he is a fan of. And so we're 180 opposites on those two topics, which is interesting because we agree on mostly everything. I agree that minerals are the foundation of the body, and to me, I don't need a study for that. That's just foundational human physiology 101. Minerals are the spark plugs for our cells. They allow enzymes to function. So Morley shares a lot of really interesting stuff that he hasn't shared in previous episodes, especially related to oxygen and the history of our planet and its relationship to oxygen. And then later on, we get into a little bit of a debate or discussion about lipid peroxidation and PUFAs. And I think it'll be a really helpful talk for people to listen to because they've likely never been exposed to these ideas before. I notice with a lot of podcasts, they just talk about ingesting rancid oils and how that's harmful. But no, that's not the issue. The issue is ingesting a perfectly preserved algae oil from China or whatever, or krill oil or fish oil, perfectly preserved Myron glass, kept in the dark, kept in cold, and you're putting that in your tropical 98.6 Fahrenheit body. That's the problem. It's not a rancid oil outside your body. Do you get the difference there? Do you get that distinction? Because it's life or death understanding that. It really is. It's not a rancid oil outside of you. It's these 22 carbon, 6 double bond, highly unsaturated DHA, EPA, and ALA are poison in the body because it's called lipid peroxidation. It's called ALOX enzymes. It's called iron overload. It's called endotoxin overload. So please read my blogs on Matt-Blackburn. It's a big picture thing. Really hard to give little tweet sound bites, 2-minute sound bites, because you're not going to change people's mind. And I've said this before in my show. It's like, show me the study is the mantra of people today. And it's like battling studies, meta-analyses. I don't need a meta-analysis to tell you that the liver stores glycogen for a reason. I don't need a meta-analysis to tell you that gluconeogenesis is harmful to human health because of the downstream effects, specifically with the sourcing of free fatty acids from PUFA in your adipose tissue. No meta-analyses required, no battling with studies required. I just smack a physiology book right in front of your face on the desk, and you see the reality of how the human organism functions, right? The metabolism, the balance, the context of what we're dealing with today, with everyone having iron poisoning. Everyone having iron poisoning. That's so, so important. It's so foundational. To me, sugar doesn't cause cancer. It's iron. To me, sugar doesn't feed Lyme disease. It's iron. Pathogens feed on iron. Iron causes every disease under the sun known to man. When you combine that with polyunsaturated fats, you have this really scary compound called Lipofuscin that doesn't just leave you in urine or feces or sweat. It's stuck in your lysosomes. Can't do autophagy. Again, no meta-analyses required, no PubMed research, anything. It's just a fact. How do we do autophagy? Why are you keto if you have Lipofuscin? Doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. And to me, that gets into realm of magnesium deficiency, because you need magnesium to think logically, to reason, for your hippocampus to work, to have memories. And everyone's magnesium deficient. Why? Because everyone's iron poisoned. Magnesium burn rate is never talked about. And magnesium bicarbonate's not a part of your diet. That's important to understand. It's not a part of your diet. You have to understand that magnesium bicarbonate was a part of your water intake. Magnesium bicarbonate is not found in any food, so it's not part of nutrition. It's not part of diet. It's part of your hydration. And these distinctions are not made in the natural health community, because they're speaking about these things in ways that don't make sense. And so there are only 3 sources of magnesium. One in the water, it's called magnesium bicarbonate, which is no longer in our water supply. The second source would be in our food. That would be like in oranges or coffee, but there's no longer magnesium in the soil, so you're not getting it in the food. So that one's out. So number 1 and number 2 is out. And then number 3 is magnesium chloride that you would get in salt. Now, I don't consume tablespoons and tablespoons of sodium chloride a day, Icelandic sea salt or whatever. So I'm not getting my magnesium from salt. And so really we have to ask what's the most natural. And to me, that's magnesium via the water supply. So this is a little rant before I get into the talk with Morley, just to kind of give you some things to ponder. You might connect some dots during my chat with him. And to me, he's just a living encyclopedia. I honor the man. It's a friendly talk. He is my mentor, a friend, a colleague, and it was just a really fun discussion. And I think someone like him is a great example, because he's not solidified in his thinking, even for him being, older. Not to bag on him, but he's older generation. Usually people that have been here longer chronologically are really solidified, cemented in the mind, and they can't change, they can't shift. Morley, I like him a lot because he's not like that. He's very open to new information. If it makes sense, then he'll integrate it into what he knows and shares. So anyway, here is Morley Robbins. Enjoy. All right, Morley Robbins, welcome back to the show for, I think this is the 5th time.
This has been a journey, my friend. I think what the public needs to know is that we've spent the last 90 minutes trying to get technically connected. And we've rebooted, restarted, done everything. And I commend you for your persistence, Matt. I really appreciate all that you did to get us connected.
Well, I appreciate your patience. And yeah, people have been really curious about this discussion that we're about to have, just about carbohydrates and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And we were speaking on the phone just now about oxygen. And I look to you as a mentor. I love your work. I always send people to your work and to the Full
Yeah.
Monty Iron Panel. I think that's so foundational. And, you know, like I said, you're not going to agree with someone 100% on everything, but I think we
Yeah.
agree on the most important things, which is oxygen. And you were saying oxygen is a poison, right?
Yeah, let me give people the context that I shared with you a little while ago. That again, this may be something that's new for people, or maybe they haven't connected all the dots. So and this is courtesy of the astrobiologists who study this very carefully. I don't know how they do this, but they have technology that allows them to make these assertions. But they claim that the planet Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that oxygen started to appear on the planet around rough numbers 2.5 billion years ago. If you want to get really fussy, it was 2.37 to 2.45 billion years ago, but who's going to quibble with that, right? So what happened was cyanobacteria, that means blue bacteria, started to split water and created oxygen. Well, that's photosynthesis. That was the start of photosynthesis. And the enzyme that was really critical in that process is called plastocyanin, and it's a copper-based function. So copper was what was enabling these bacteria to split water and to release oxygen into the atmosphere. And at this particular point in time, it's called the Great Oxygen Event. It's in the literature. There's a lot of articles about it. There was 0.1% of oxygen in the atmosphere. Today we have 21%. So 0.1% of oxygen, and it killed 99% of life because life was anaerobic. So our origin is an anaerobic planet that had an aerobic crisis called the Great Oxygen Event. Now let's fast forward to 2020. Now we have 21% oxygen, and we're an aerobic planet having an anaerobic crisis because the two leading causes of death, and I would argue all causes of death and aging, is an anaerobic crisis. It's very clear in the literature that both heart disease, atherosclerosis, is considered an anaerobic metabolism, and cancer is an anaerobic metabolism. And it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out why, because you got to have copper in order to work with oxygen. And just one more quick thing, and then we'll get into our little love fest here. So in order to exist on this planet, and the reason why you and I are having this conversation, despite your technical prowess, is that we're able to work with oxygen. And in order to exist on this planet, oxygen is a poison. It's a highly reactive element, paramagnetic. It's very tough to work with. And you got to be able to activate oxygen and make water to release the energy precursor molecules, ADP. You got to be able to deactivate oxidants, which are given off in the process of making ATP. And you got to be able to store oxygen in something called cholesterol. Turns out there's 11 molecules of oxygen in 1 molecule of cholesterol. And what's important to understand is that these enzymes that allow us to turn oxygen into water, multi-copper oxidases, enzymes that allow us to defuse these oxidants, ferroxidase, glutathione peroxidase, catalase, peroxidase. These are very important antioxidant enzymes, all powered by copper. And there are 8 genes that depend on copper in order to make cholesterol. So copper allows us to harness oxygen on this planet. And if you don't have copper, you got a problem. And it turns out that copper is essential to break down fat, and all fat metabolism is dependent on copper. Glucose intolerance is a function of copper deficiency. Glucose intolerance precedes insulin resistance by a matter of years because the pancreas can't do its function without energy and without the availability of copper. And so I think the bottom line is, this is what surprised me the most this past week, was learning that yeast, which we evolved from, have 50,000 atoms of copper in their mitochondria. And I've talked to 2 copper experts in the last 2 days, neither of which has a clue how much copper is in our mitochondria. And I have a call into a third. And if I come up 0 there, then I know that we're being misled and misfed on a very grand scale, because all the leading research now is about mitochondrial iron pools. They're called labile iron pools. And so what they've done is they've flipped this organelle, mitochondria, from being a copper-based organelle into an iron-based organelle. And I think that therein lies the origin of the problem, and everyone's suffering from oxidative stress because oxygen and iron don't play well together, and we don't have enough bioavailable copper in our body. So with that, I will stop talking, and we can I just wanted people to have that backdrop, because I think it's really important for our discussion as it relates to oxidative stress, which is really that's what the battle is on this planet. We've got to be able to harness that oxygen, and we have a torturous fight with our pathogens over who gets control of the iron to move that oxygen around.
And that was really great. Thanks for that context, Morley. And that's a great foundation, because from there, the next step is getting into the magnesium burn rate being really high, right? When copper is not there and we have too much iron in the macrophages, then the magnesium burn rate's through the roof, and that further decreases glucose tolerance, right? As you mentioned, if you don't have copper, then you can't utilize glucose, and there's so many aspects, I think, to utilizing carbohydrate. And I guess my big thing with educating is people are blaming like carbs when they should be blaming the mineral imbalance, right?
I totally agree. I think that's absolutely essential, right? And because people don't know about minerals, or they just take them for granted, that I was talking to a colleague just today, and I said, "Do you understand how your car works?" And she said, "Well, I think I do." I said, "Well, what is it that actually causes the piston to move to cause the crankshaft to turn?" She goes, I guess I don't know." I said, "There's a spark." She went, "Oh, yeah, right." She says, "There's gas and air fills the chamber, and then, oh, there's a spark." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Minerals are the spark in our cells." She went, "Oh." And so again, if people don't understand that they are the spark plug. And in talking with Leslie Clavet yesterday, he's just a preeminent copper expert. The typical literature will say, well, there's about 10 to 12 copper enzymes. He said, well, it's actually about 100. And I said, well, it's not just 100, Dr. Clavet. I said, to me, the 2 most important enzymes are, you got to activate oxygen, that's called cytochrome C oxidase. I said, you got to deactivate iron, that's called ferroxidase. He goes, can't dispute that. So there's a hierarchy to these enzymes. It isn't just that there are 100, they're the 100 most important, because they're allowing us to work with oxygen, for heaven's sake. And so there's a lot of transactions that involve harnessing this oxygen. And then to learn that cholesterol goes back to 2.5 billion years ago. And one of my favorite cartoons is a fish in the water talking to a lungfish, which was the first creature to come out of the water. And the fish says, you better be careful, that air breathing is going to be the death of you. And the lungfish looks back to the other fish and says, don't worry, my doctor says I have high cholesterol. I'm going to be just fine. Which is priceless. I mean, it's like, and what was the cause of the problem back in the 50s? It was the oxidation of the cholesterol, because 10 years before, they've been adding iron filings to the wheat flour. And when you have lipid peroxidation, and that's what rusting cholesterol is, that's the fancy term, lipid peroxidation. I didn't know this until just the other day. It turns cholesterol that is soluble into an insoluble form, and that's why it starts to accumulate. And so it's just like the whole composition and structure and function of cholesterol changes after it's been oxidized because of the iron reacting with hydrogen peroxide or reacting with superoxide. I mean, it's just like, come on. Why, it's like we've been going in circles for 65 years worrying about cholesterol, when in fact, and who pushed us into the low-fat diet? The sugar industry. And that was just revealed, in the last couple of years, that some guys out at Harvard, in the 60s, were the ones that were behind that. It's like, oh my gosh, because they knew that sugar was the cause of heart disease. I mean, it's like, And again, I know we can go around and around about, we've got to be careful when we say sugar. We got to be careful when we say fats. We got to be careful when we say oxidation. So I think in the context of this conversation, we want to be very respectful of the terminology and not have glib generalities.
Yeah, that's well said. And I love how detailed you are with everything, and the details matter. And I think people can get lost if they're just hyper focused, but focusing on the right details, like what are, the right forms of sugar. Like for me, I think it's fruits and roots and raw honey, which is a great source of potassium, which acts like insulin, which most people are having insulin issues because they have PUFA stored in the pancreas. And I mean, you said the term lipid peroxidation, and I think that's where I'm coming from. And you've sent me some interesting articles via email about lipid peroxidation and how it's increased by iron, specifically with the ALOX enzymes. But there's also endotoxin, which increases lipid peroxidation. And where I'm coming from is
what's the critter living on? Those endotoxins. Iron. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. And I guess where I'm coming from is like the context of, you always talk about, iron fortification, but we also had PUFA fortification. So I was raised on vegetable oils, and those are still in me. And it's not getting orthorexic and getting really crazy about, I need to get them all out, but it's just understanding that I have these polyunsaturated fats. Right. To be more specific, they're byproducts, they're breakdown products like acrolein in me. And then that's something to be aware of, with this whole piece.
Oh no, acrolein it's a scary substance. And I think Ray Peat does a masterful job of explaining why it's so dangerous. And in fact, I think he makes the point that was probably what caused. That's a major contributing factor for atherosclerosis. There are multiple factors, obviously, and in fact, I've just come across a fascinating channel. It's called the capital K, capital CA 3.1. It's a potassium calcium channel. 3.1. It's in just about every cell in the body. And this channel is protected by a copper atom. And when the copper is there, no issue. When the copper gets bumped out for a wide variety of reasons, potassium leaves the cell, and it's called hyperpolarization. What does hyperpolarization do? It allows a rush of calcium to be released from the endoplasmic reticulum, and the whole energy dynamics of the cell changes. And it's absolutely fascinating. Well, it is the gateway for atherosclerosis, the gateway for cancer, the gateway for every conceivable autoimmune disease. It's when that potassium channel gets activated and starts to release potassium, it's a very scary moment for the cells. And
Wow.
this is the leading edge research. This is like 2017, 18, 19. They're just now beginning to piece this together.
And I'm sure that's exacerbated with no magnesium, right? Because potassium antagonizes magnesium
Absolutely.
like calcium does.
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely true. But what's important to understand is that what tripped the wire to start the release of calcium. Most people don't know that lipid peroxidation is also happening on the cell membrane, and it triggers, there's a whole series of events that take place that cause the endoplasmic reticulum to get stressed out. What most people don't know is that there's an enzyme in there called ER oxidase. Oh, you think maybe copper's involved there? And so if there's not ER oxidase in the endoplasmic reticulum, well, then calcium starts to get released. And when calcium gets released, then you've got two agents that are causing oxidative stress, iron on the outside and calcium on the inside. It's like, good heavens. And so I just came across an interesting 4-part series by Bill Sardi. I'm sure you're familiar with some of his writing. And it's called The Unifying Theory of Aging. And he talks about the over-mineralization of the cell. This is from 2007. I'd never seen these articles. The guy's a genius, but there's only 2 minerals that he's focusing on, iron and calcium. I mean, we're back to the same cast of characters. And so if magnesium's low, we know that calcium's going to act out. And if copper's low, we know that iron's going to act out. And it's people are thinking, wait, it's got to be more complicated than that. No, it doesn't. Because it starts to affect thousands of downstream functions that people aren't aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I follow a lot of people that are doing really extreme diets. Like some people are doing carnivore that I follow, like no plants whatsoever, no fruit, which I think is insane. And then
one of my colleagues is doing that. Yeah.
Really? And then other people, like I have fruitarian friends who are eating, maybe bee products, so at least they're getting some copper from pollen, but no other animal products. And I think so I'm just always trying to come into balance, like not restricting any macronutrient, because I don't think that's natural. Like what does mother's breast milk has sugar, right? And it's like 11% sugar or something.
Well, it does. The other thing that I just came to learn a few months ago, 95% of the cells in mother's milk are macrophages. Did you know that? I mean, that's a staggering statistic. 95% of the cells are macrophages. You think infant formula has macrophages? I don't think so. So yeah, and again, what is also missing in mother's milk? Vitamin D and iron, because Mother Nature knows they're not needed in an infant. It's like, this isn't rocket science, but the average person doesn't know that.
Are they in raw milk too? Because I'm doing a lot of like raw A2 cow's milk and raw goat's milk. There are macrophages in those as well, right?
Well, yeah, but do you think the macrophage might get killed? Well, if it's raw, unprocessed, I think you're okay. And that may in part be why they don't want us to have access to unprocessed milk, because of the macrophages and how important they are to our overall health and well-being.
That's incredible. Wow. Well, I like that, because you say that the only important minerals you really have to focus on, at least at the start of your journey, is iron, copper, and magnesium, right? And I notice a lot of people, especially keto carnivores, are all about, they're using potassium bicarbonate. It's like, guys, you're focusing on the wrong mineral.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who do need the potassium because they danced with vitamin D for too long. And there's a lot of renal potassium wasting because of that. I haven't found it yet, but I think the mechanism is that vitamin D supplements are affecting this KCA 3.1 channel and activating it, causing the potassium loss, which is then causing the hyperpolarization and stuff like that. And again, we're throwing out this terminology like we're experts. It's like, no, we're just two guys trying to help people based on our reading of the literature. And I just appreciate having the conversation. So it gets, I know you have the same sensation. Sometimes it feels like we're in an echo chamber. We're talking to ourselves all the time. It's like, it's just nice to talk to another living being that will at least tolerate you and then question or challenge or agree or disagree. That's fine. I don't mind disagreement. It's just, well, we have to have dialogue to find out where are we in alignment, where are we out of alignment? Not so much you and me, but just society. I think society has no true north anymore. I think it's flailing, I think. And it's a very unsettling dynamic that we're going through right now.
That was well said. Yeah, and I have a supplement line of systemic enzymes and digestive enzymes and shilajit and vitamin E, and I think they're helpful. But I see a lot of people in the supplement industry just promoting, like I spoke with you on the phone about, molecular hydrogen and nootropics, like really synthetic nootropics, and modafinil, just crazy stuff, and CBD and all these things that are trending. It's like you guys are just putting band-aids instead of looking at the foundation, which is iron overload, right? And copper deficiency.
Well, I had the good fortune of meeting Michael Greenberg, who's a very noted marketing expert for alternative health, nutrition and alternative health. Guy's a genius. And he said, I'm often asked, hey, Michael, what's new? He said, well, let's talk about what's enduring. And it was that conversation that we had that got me to say, wait a minute, have I gone far enough back to figure out what's enduring? That's what got me to the Great Oxygen event. And as you well know, everyone loves to talk about the next shiny object, the new shiny object. Well, there's only one object we need to focus on, and it's an old, rusty object. It's called oxygen. It rusts very easily in our body. And people got to wake up to the reality of the free radical theory of aging. It's unbelievable that this isn't the focal point of people's awareness about, why do I have these wrinkles? Why is my hair changing? Why is my muscle not working right? Why is my whatever is not working right? It's because it's getting rusty. I don't think it's that complicated.
Yeah, there's an epidemic right now of hair issues. I think we might have spoken about this in previous episodes, but I get a lot of balding men messaging me, and then even women I've seen in their early 20s with their hair falling out, like in clumps. It's like, it's hydrogen peroxide, right, from oxidative stress. And
well, yeah, and it's and what's the recommended intervention? Take iron. And there are people who have done that, and their hair stops falling out. I can't explain it. I mean, it's just, hair loss is a sign of stress. Let's just agree on that. And why would adding iron to your body stop the stress? It makes absolutely no sense. I was talking to a very dear colleague of mine yesterday, and she was going crazy because she's a naturopath down in LA, and she just couldn't convince this woman that was a bad way to solve that problem. So, but yet there's some people say you should get your ferritin at over 100 to stop the hair loss. And it's like, do you understand what that really means? It's a really scary thing to do. So
that's wild. Yeah, I mean, you've used the term psychodrama, and I love that that terminology. And I mean, that's Instagram in a nutshell, and Facebook, and people just butting heads over carbs versus fat for fuel, and that's a very like elementary conversation. I mean, we can go there, but why not talk about mineral balance first, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's a very wise platform to speak from. I think I'd mentioned a couple books, and I'll share it for the listeners. That two good books to read. One is Primal Body, Primal Mind by Nora Gados. I always stumble. Thank you. I always stumble on her name. I'm embarrassed. And then the other one that's really, really wonderful is Deep Nutrition by Kate with a C, Kate Shanahan. She's a physician. Really, she picked up where Weston A. Price left off. And I think they have a really balanced understanding of what the historical diet was for Homo sapiens. But one of the points that's in the Primal Body, Primal Mind is, and this was in an earlier edition, I don't know whether it's still in the revised edition, but she said if you talk to an archaeologist and ask them what did early man and early woman eat, she said if they're telling you the truth, it was the fattest meat they could find. And as I've come to study it, this is my take on it. I think that we were designed to eat fat and make sugar. The liver makes sugar, as you well know. And I think that what's happened, back to flipping everything around, I think they are trying to turn us into machines that can consume sugar and then we get fat. And you can see it. All you have to do is go to Starbucks and see what's happening to society, or go to Walmart or wherever people congregate. Go to Walgreens, you'll see the morphology of America. And I think it's a very simplistic model, but I really think that we were designed to eat higher concentrations of fat, and our body was supposed to have endogenous sugar, not tons and tons of exogenous sugar. And that's just my common sense view of what I've read. And the incidence of diabetes is frightening. And you make a really good point about it could be the PUFAs in the pancreas. The other thing that I do know is that there was a very interesting study done by Dr. Fell in 1982. He was a British researcher, and they withheld copper from these animals. And what happened? The pancreas started to break down because it didn't have energy. And what happened was 90% of what are called acinar, ACINAR, 90% of the acinar cells started to die. And what then happened is absolutely fascinating. It's called transdifferentiation. The acinar cells became hepatocytes. Those are liver cells. And so as the acinar cells are dying, they send a signal to the endocrine part of the pancreas, and the production of insulin went up like 40-fold. This huge increase of insulin because the body realized it couldn't metabolize the sugar, so it used the insulin to force it into the tissue. It's a very interesting response. And then the tissue started to become hepatocytes. Why would it become hepatocytes? Because hepatocytes work with copper in the liver. And the pancreas was smart enough to know that it needed copper, but there was none in the diet. And then the tragedy is that once the hepatocyte gets formed, it cannot go back to being an acinar cell. Well, all of this happens in people. I've got a very dear friend he's a type 2 diabetic, and he came to America from India, and he started drinking Coca-Cola with high fructose corn syrup, which blocked copper from absorption. And guess what happened? He got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease when he was in his 30s, and then he got diabetes in his 40s.
Wow.
And so it was all because of copper being shut down. And then irons, once copper is not available to the animal, iron starts to load in the organs, and it starts with the liver. That's the origin of fatty liver disease, copper deficiency coupled with iron overload. And so then all the metabolic pathways start to break down. They don't work right, and then you got a mess on your hands. And this is all happening years before the insulin starts to rise. And then you find out that, oh yeah, this insulin thing, it's important for sugar, but it also transports vitamin C. Did you know that? And so when you start to introduce a lot of sugar into the diet, insulin starts to get distracted because it's got to get rid of sugar. Why? Because it's really toxic. It's very disruptive to the chemistry of the body, and the vitamin C starts to not be transported the way it's supposed to, and there's an immune function collapse that lasts for hours. So it's just, that's why if you have too much sugar, and I know you're not pushing sugar in that sense, but when there's too much glucose in the diet, you're going to have an immune challenge long term, not short term, but long term if it's a chronic condition. So those are just some additional thoughts. And then the one other thing that I would add, because I think you'll find this fascinating. We know about the FOX enzyme, ferroxidase enzyme. Well, there's also something called the FOXO transcription factor, FOXO. There's a whole family of these FOXO transcription factors. And when insulin starts to rise, and there's insulin resistance because the insulin can't get in the cell because the tyrosine kinase won't let it in because of a lack of magnesium, ding, ding, ding. When the insulin's rising, the FOXO transcription factor blocks the synthesis of ceruloplasmin in the body. Think that might be a problem?
Wow.
The master antioxidant protein not being made? And there's a direct correlation in diabetes between high iron, low copper, high iron, and ineffective ceruloplasmin. It's like, again, we're back to the foundation of these minerals if they're not working right. And so then if you don't have ceruloplasmin, you've lost the master antioxidant enzyme, peroxidase. Then you've lost the ability to regulate iron so it doesn't cause more oxidative stress. I don't know. I don't think it's that complicated. Let's focus on oxygen. Let's do what we can to minimize its agitation. Let's activate it as much as we can with copper. Let's deactivate it as much as we can with copper. And if we need to store it in cholesterol, let's do that. But let's not get worried about cholesterol being, 203. Oh, you need a statin. Well, you know that drill. And it's just people don't realize that actually one of the major findings of the Framingham Heart Study was the older the participant, the more cholesterol and the healthier they were. So my cholesterol is actually around 250, which some would say, oh my God, he's going to have a heart attack. Well, I'm 67. A lot of stress when you're 67. You're just a young Turk. What are you, in your early 30s or something? Or late 20s? Yeah. Or whatever? How old are you?
32. Yeah.
Okay, 32. So your cholesterol is probably dancing around 180 to 200, which is great. That's where mine was when I was your age. But as you get older, you actually want it to go up. Why? Because you need that cholesterol to make stress hormones. Because you know what? I'm worried about the end of the party. You're not. You're having fun at 32. You're just full of yourself, and 67. Shit, I've got one foot in the grave, man.
No, I think you're going to be around for a long time, from what you know. So. Yeah,
but I thought those would be fun things for people to be chewing on as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, there was so much there. I made a lot of notes. That was amazing, and most of it I agree with. Some I didn't, but the high fructose corn syrup I think is the main thing where it's like people see fructose and then they associate fruit with diabetes. It's like, no,
yeah.
You mentioned it. The high fructose shuts down copper absorption, right? And so it's what the old sodas used to be made with cane sugar, and now you look at all the sodas and it's high fructose corn syrup, and so everyone thinks that's sugar, but it's mostly starch. So it's like half starch.
That's right. And what's the other point of heartburn for you, or other points of heartburn? Where do you see it a little bit differently? Because I want to learn what you know, or at least how you see it, because I think it could be an important nuance to what I understand.
Yeah, and I'm definitely open to learning as well. My main thing is with the liver, and I have a friend in Canada. I have friends that are dealing with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and just cirrhosis and all sorts of problems with the liver. And from what I learned from you, like copper is really important. Choline's really important. I think Chris Masterjohn's talked about choline a lot.
Absolutely.
I'm a fan of eggs, but like glycogen, I think, is the primary fuel of the liver. And when we restrict carbohydrates, I know that the liver, doesn't have glycogen, and so we're relying on gluconeogenesis But my question there is like, what are the ramifications or the side effects of running on the backup system, gluconeogenesis, versus, having some raw milk like I do every day, or some raw honey, which are ancestral foods, right? I mean, I don't know if I believe that ancestral humans weren't consuming raw milk and honey,
Yeah,
in
I
large amounts.
absolutely agree with you. I think when you get into the weeds of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, it's an absolute mismatch between copper and iron. And then when you learn about the potassium calcium 3.1 channel, you'll find out that what happens is when that channel gets activated, it starts to have a love fest with TGF beta 1. And TGF beta 1 is the fibrotic mechanism in the body. It's the transcription factor for fibrosis. And I don't know about the glycogen argument. I've never read that in the literature, but I've probably read 25 articles about the mineral mismatch that causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it is a loss of copper. As soon as you have a shortage of copper in an animal body, there's an immediate accumulation of iron in the liver. And we've known that since 1928. That's the work of Hart, Steenbach, Waddell, and LVM at the University of Wisconsin. And they went on to study that even more. And then in the 50s, it was Weintraub and Cartwright at the University of Utah. And then it was Earl Frieden down at FSU, Florida State University. And now it's Jamie Collins at University of Florida in Gainesville. I mean, there's some really smart people. And Leslie Clavet at the USDA Human Research Lab. So a lot of people have been studying these dynamics between copper and iron for a long time. And the glaring growth of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in an era where we are overwhelmed with lousy sugars that block, what they do is they block the front doorway of letting copper in. It's called CTR1, copper transporter 1. The world's authority on that is just down the street from where I live. His name is Dennis Thiel at Duke University. And I fully intend to meet with him to say, so what are you doing to stop this? And he's studying how to stop it. Let's start worrying about how to start it up. And so I don't think and again, I don't mean to make light of the condition, but the need for bioavailable copper, the need for retinol, the need for less iron, and as you say, choline is very important. It's a B vitamin. It's very important for the function of the liver. It's the backbone of all of the bile salts. That's the chassis. Choline is the chassis for all the bile salts. And if that bile gets rusty, it doesn't work right. It's subject to the same thing. And so I hear people talking about congested livers, and I say, what do you think it's congested with? They're like, well, like it's got a cold, like it's got phlegm. No, it doesn't have phlegm. It's got iron, for heaven's sake. That's what it's congested about. And it's become this metallic rock that goes from being this fleshy, soft, basically fat, to then becoming fibrotic, and then becoming cancerous. And it's like, come on, guys, it's not that complicated.
Right. Yeah, and going back to oxygen too, like when we talked a little bit about lipid peroxidation, I just wanted to dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I sell a non-GMO sunflower derived vitamin E, and I always tell people get it wherever, but there's a deep relationship between PUFAs and oxidation, and then
Yes.
vitamin E and PUFAs. And vitamin E actually protects against iron overload and lipid peroxidation. I have a study pulled up by Brett Wagner. Vitamin E slows the rate of free radical mediated lipid peroxidation in the cells. And I've seen in the literature, and I think it's kind of suppressed, but vitamin E requirements is increased 6 times when you have PUFAs. And I don't even think in the diet, it's just in the, in the tissues, or their byproducts in the tissues rather. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And what historically has been a good source of vitamin E has been wheat products. Wheat germ oil. And what do most people avoid now? They're gluten-free. So they don't realize the sacrifice they're making there. And there's no gluten in vitamin E. My clients and people who follow the protocol freak out when they say wheat germ oil, like, oh, I can't get it. It's like, there's no gluten in an oil, don't you? So, but they have this mindset they can't do that. But then something that I read, and I don't have the citation for you, but I'll track it down. But it was a high beta carotene diet will block the effect of vitamin E. So what's special about vitamin E is it's called a chain-breaking antioxidant. And the most interesting study I ever read was comparing the antioxidant capacity of vitamin E to 3 different chemotherapy drugs. And they had to stop the study because the vitamin E was outperforming the 3 chemotherapy drugs combined. It's very powerful in its natural state with tocotriens and tocopherols, and you got selenium in the center. It's an unbelievable blockbuster, but it's alpha tocopherol is a joke. It's not. That's not vitamin E. That's big pharma vitamin E. That's not the real deal.
Yeah, mine's basically a tocopherol complex, but like Herbert Bailey has some good books about vitamin E, and D-alpha tocopherol they're using in a lot of the studies, and I have the citations here. I mean, eye conditions, even mental retardation, literally. What the study was.
Again, what is vitamin E doing? It's stopping oxidative stress. That's that's the fight in the body, and it will affect hormone synthesis. It'll affect metabolic pathways. It'll affect the immune system. When oxygen starts to act out, it's a bad element in the body. And I think your point about the PUFAs historically, in your body, and you think you've got PUFAs, buddy? I got lots of PUFAs in my body because we didn't learn this until we were much older, But the thing is, the PUFAs are really bad, especially around oxygen. And what's the fastest way to cause lipid peroxidation? Expose a PUFA to iron. It's a great way to start the chain.
And I find the relationship fascinating between vitamin E, which is recycled by vitamin C, which is recycled by glutathione. Did I get that right? And glutathione production is hammered by iron overload, right?
Yep. And it's hammered by a lack of energy. If you don't have magnesium, there's two steps in making glutathione that require magnesium ATP. And you got to have the right amino acids. Obviously, you got to have the sulfur, cysteines, and what's important for glutathione is the ability to recycle it, and that's where glutathione peroxidase comes in play. And what's a particularly noteworthy thing to know about is that Tylenol kills glutathione peroxidase. That's not good. That will kill the liver. That's why there's a lot of liver disease with Tylenol use.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's just the Lipofuscin thing I really study because I know that accumulates in the brain and the heart, even in the skin. I mean, that's what I think skin cancer is from. It's from PUFAs. PUFAs are extremely reactive to not only iron, but especially aluminum and ultraviolet light. And so a lot of people going and eating their fried, dum-dums or whatever, and then going to the beach. It's really the PUFAs that are causing skin cancer with that reaction.
Right. Yeah. And again, if there aren't mechanisms in place to harness the oxygen, they're going to start to bounce around with other elements. That's the key. And the thing, I don't know whether we've talked about it, the number of copper atoms that are in the yeast mitochondria, 50,000. And maybe I mentioned this, forgive me for getting distracted, but talking to 2 copper experts and they don't know how many coppers are in a human mitochondria, that's a little scary. So I think this organelle of ours, these mitochondria, I think they're basically copper beings. And here's the question that I'm worried about. Who's organizing all the mitochondria in the body? Who's keeping them in line? It's not the nucleus doesn't run the cell. Who's running all these mitochondria that are providing energy and producing oxidants? Do you ever think about stuff like that?
So the nervous system.
I don't lose sleep, thank God, but that's the kind of question that would almost put me on the edge of insomnia. Who's running the mitochondria? And here's another one. Just to really I'm going to give you insomnia now. We need oxygen in complex 4 of the mitochondria. Absolutely essential. Where does it come from? There's nothing in the literature. I've talked to research experts. Nobody knows where the oxygen that comes to complex 4 is coming from. And the glib answer is, well, it's coming from hemoglobin. Well, how is it actually getting to the mitochondria? And what exactly? Who's taking it off of the heme and putting it into? We're talking about a hand grenade that's had the pin taken out when you take oxygen off of heme, right? Do you understand that? This is not. We're not talking about Tinker Toys here. This is a very volatile transaction. And who's minding the store? There's nothing in the literature about it.
Do you think it's copper?
No, I think it might be copper. It's either going to be magnesium or copper, right? Mm-hmm. And so everyone will say, well, they'll look it up and there'll be an article by Wittenberg and Wittenberg from 2007, and it very clearly says nobody knows. Mm-hmm. The most important element in the mitochondria, oxygen, and there's a big goose egg in the literature about how it. Don't you find that fascinating?
That's interesting.
So I will invite you to look for that and invite your followers to look for that. I can't wait to find out. Who's minding the store with mitochondria? Who's keeping them organized? And who's delivering the oxygen to make them do their magic?
That's a good
Is anybody else a sentient being out there? Is anybody else thinking about these things?
That's an awesome homework assignment. That's gonna take a while.
Yeah, and I'm going to start the stopwatch now. You know? And I am going to turn into a pumpkin in a couple minutes. So I know we got a late start, but this has been. I have a feeling this is going to be a 2-part conversation because I think
so,
you're going to want to digest what we've talked about. I'm going to want to digest what you've shared, and then we're going to come back and say where is the alignment, where's the misalignment, and again, it's as you say beautifully, we're not going to agree on everything, and that's fine. Because if we agreed on everything, we'd have nothing to talk about.
Right. You gave me what is it, grist for your mill? I like all your little phrases.
Yeah,
it's stuff absolutely. To chew on. Yeah, so it's interesting. I like all the FOXO transcription factors, that tyrosine kinase. That's fascinating, and the TGF1. I have a lot of stuff to look into.
The TGF beta it's a badass, and it gets into a whipsaw with the potassium calcium channel, and when that starts to happen, it starts to trigger the production of fibrotic material, and it's at that point it can't be stopped.
That's incredible. Yeah, because I'm helping people like lower the accumulations, which I think are the primary cause of disease and aging, or these accumulations of iron, of lipofuscin specifically, which is complex iron and PUFAs and other things, and calcification, from multiple sources, and then fibrosis that comes from that. And what do all 3 of those do? They all inhibit oxygen utilization, right? So.
No, beautiful. That's so important for people to understand that. And again, here's the difference between your body and a 90-year-old body. The 90-year-old has 30 times more calcium in their cells than you do. So talk about accumulation. And then the growth of iron in the cells, the difference in iron in my tissue than your tissue, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I can assure you it's a big delta, even with all the work that I've done the last few years. And I really would encourage you to track down those articles by Bill Sardi from 2007, A Unifying Theory of Aging. I think you will find them fascinating because he does talk about Lipofuscin and the accumulation of calcium and iron. And that's really what it's about. Because if once calcium and iron start to accumulate, they're going to create more oxidative stress. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to use up the oxygen that should be used for making energy, right? That's where the disconnect is that we're supposed to have this oxygen and make it so we can have energy, but if it's getting diverted because the accumulation of these minerals, these negative minerals in the sense of aging, well then we're just working against ourselves.
How do you spell? It's Bill Sardi. Is that S-A-R-D-Y?
S-A-R-D-I. I is in India.
Got it.
2007, and Unifying Theory of Aging.
Awesome.
Just put in the phrase over mineralization of cells, and you'll find it's a 4-part series.
Awesome. I think you know that I'm a big Shilajit fan. I've been taking that resin from different mountain ranges for like 7 or 8 years, and recently I got a whole house water filtration set up where it takes out actually 100% of the iron, 100% of the sulfuric and nitric and other acids.
Wow.
So, and then I'm putting Shilajit in the bath, so I've been bathing in Shilajit. And so
wow.
I thought you'd find that funny just because I'm getting.
That's fascinating. That's fantastic. Yeah.
The idea is to get transdermal minerals, and I've been researching like indium, and at that point it's probably getting pretty complex. But I know these trace minerals that aren't in the soil anymore, like indium. Indium's responsible for glucose utilization, and there's so many little ones that activate these electrical highways, right? So.
Wow. No, that's phenomenal. No, I would love to learn more about that. The other real tidbit before we part company here for this chat, a buddy of mine, a student, and he's just an incessant researcher. He was telling me earlier today that that sugars come in 2 forms, Levo and Rhodo. Do you know about that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so Levo means they unfold to the left, and Rhodo means they unfold to the right. Levo is natural, Rhodo is synthetic. And what he was saying is that the adage is that cancer has a lot of glucose receptors looking for sugar. Well, the Levo sugars don't attach to cancer. The Rhodo sugars do. The high fructose corn syrups, the synthetic sugars. And so that might be another nuance for you to be aware of as you're advising people about the sugar, is to make sure they're not, I know you would not advise synthetics or processed sugars, but maybe some people don't know there's a difference, and it makes a huge difference as it relates to the function of these cancer cells.
Fascinating. Yeah, I've never heard those terms. I'll look into it. And I think what's missing from the sugar conversation too, if you have magnesium and you don't have a ton of iron and you have copper, then there's the sugar metabolism is completely different, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to have enzymes to break it down. And the story goes that the workers in the sugarcane fields who are chewing on sugarcane were thin, and the owners of the plantation were using refined sugar, and they were fat. And what's the difference? There's no minerals in the refined sugar. There's lots and lots of minerals in the sugarcane. So I think it all goes back to what's the source, how natural is it, and Mother Nature's not going to leave us high and dry. So I think it's being aware of the ancestral wisdom of what's the right source of these nutrients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I think raw honey, blended with like raw goat's milk is just a superfood, super shake. Yeah. That's the best smoothie you can make.
I think it was the 1932 Olympics. The Swiss goat herders dominated the track and field, and they were drinking goat cream, which was just this incredible source of energy for them, and just loaded with fat, as you can imagine. It's a very celebrated story about those athletes during that Olympiad.
That's really cool. Yeah, and goats are the only known animal that can synthesize its own vitamin E. So that might be part of it too.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Oh my God. Really? I did not know that. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been drinking goat's milk for years, so I've researched the goat a little bit.
Well,
Um,
they have a special relationship with copper, as you probably know.
mhm.
They're
Well,
very.
awesome, Morley. Yeah, I agree that we have to do another part, and yeah, we both have some things to look
I got
into.
to
And I
do some
just
research. I got to school myself up on the Lipofuscin and the PUFAs. I want to make sure and then we can come back at it and have a continuation of this because I think again, I think the important thing is for people to be focused on oxygen and
Mhm.
how they're managing it and ease up a little bit on what kind of food are they eating. But are they eating food that's going to support the metabolism of the oxygen? That's really what it comes down to. So,
Well said. Awesome, Morley. Well, thank you. Stick around. I'm going to close out the show.
and again, if anyone on listening to this has any kind of tech issues with their computer, give Matt a call. He's amazing.
I love it.
All right. Have a good one.
Well, that's a wrap for today's show. I definitely have some homework, as does Morley. I had not heard of that Levo and Rhodo unfolding to the left with synthetic and attaching to cancer cells and unfolding to the right being natural and not attaching to cancer. I definitely want to ask someone like Dr. Raymond Pete, PhD, or Georgie Dinkoff or Danny Roddy about that, because for my research, cane sugar extract, aka processed cane sugar, is just pure sucrose with no toxicity involved. It's just natural. It's just like coconut oil. It's just an extract. So that's something that I definitely want to research and look into. I've never heard of that before. And I seem to have introduced some concepts to Morley that he hasn't heard of before. I think the glycogen thing in the liver is something that everyone wants a study for, and it's interesting because that's just how the body works. And I know that just like the Encyclopedia Britannica, over the editions over the years have had things intentionally erased from them. So too has human physiology books. And so I would imagine it's a little harder to find at this point. But maybe it's not. If you guys know of any sources, usually there are PDF copies online that you can find because it's harder to erase stuff from the internet. So there are websites where you can look back even years ago where it screenshotted it from these certain websites. I can't remember the name, but yeah, there's a lot of suppression. And I think people forget that aspect. I just uploaded a YouTube series called The Suppressed Vitamin, all about vitamin E. And you've never heard of Dr. Evan Shute of Ontario, Canada for a reason, because he was using vitamin E therapy to treat various conditions. And all we hear about is omega-3s nowadays. So a really interesting conundrum that we're in. I do think the mineral place is a logical starting point, because if you have excess unbound iron, if you have chronic copper deficiency, chronic severe magnesium deficiency, you're going to spin your wheels and you're going to think that keto or carnivore can fix you, or you're going to think that diet can fix you, period. You're going to think that a device could help you heal. And you're going to be just doing all of these really complex alkaline water and just spinning your wheels, going to all these really weird things, instead of treating the foundation, which is your iron poisoning. Which, if you have your iron saturation way up there, 30%, 40%, 50%, that is the root of all of your health issues. Because your cells cannot generate energy properly. If you can't generate energy, you can't heal. So, hope you guys got something out of this interview. I know I did. I always re-listen to my interviews with Morley because they're so interesting, and I love his perspective. I love how he articulates. I love his analogies. It's all good stuff. And you can check out his work at therootcauseprotocol.com. He has great blog posts. He's also on Facebook. If you just YouTube his name, he has tons of videos. And it's a worthwhile rabbit hole to go down. I see a lot of people going down rabbit holes that are just kind of a waste of time. whether it be conspiracies or different things where you don't really get anywhere. With the mineral thing, you're actually getting somewhere, and you're healing your body at the fundamental level. You're bringing balance to your chemistry at a fundamental level. It's not a waste of time to go down the mineral rabbit hole, because you'll get a lot out of it. And as always, if you want to support my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have all my recommended products there, all my blog posts there, my CLF protocol, which works beautifully with the root cause protocol if you do those kind of together. And my brand is mitolife.co. So I have products on there. I'm coming out with some more in the near future here, but people are loving the Panacea Pure Shilajit tablets. People are loving the Dissolve It All systemic enzymes, which is great for any itis or osis that you might have. It's really good to eat that up like Pac-Man, eat up the fibrin, eat up the scar tissue. And thanks so much for just continuing to support me and listen to the show. It really means a lot if you just share this with your friends, post it on your social media, give it to your coworkers, text them the link to a show that you think could help them. Because I found that this medium of a radio show is one of the best ways to get through to people. Because you can read a blog post and you can read a Facebook or Instagram post and get something out of it. But when it's a discussion between two people where there's a lot of questions being asked and a good back and forth, I find that I learn more that way, and I'm a little more receptive to the information, especially with the controversial, counterintuitive things that I share on this show. It could be very beneficial. So if you know anyone that's kind of like locked in their ways, or kind of stubborn or extreme skeptics, I think my show is a really great introduction to some new ideas for them. Today's quote is by Morley Robbins. Iron is the stressor that is causing excess loss of magnesium. We have come to realize that it is the causative agent to create oxygen stress and nitrogen stress that is at the heart of neutering ceruloplasmin, the very protein and enzyme that is essential to properly manage this toxic metal.